Good evening. Let's see, it's 10:25 p.m. It's well past my bedtime. And I am going to be responding to your questions. I got 7 responses, ton. And what I'm going to be doing is answering questions serially as I got them. All right, so question number 1. What's the difference between hypothesis testing and power? I understand that power is a function of effect size, sample size, and alpha, but at the end you said that since power is 1, it's almost certain to reject the null. In hypothesis testing, what part of the t-test rejects or fails to reject the null? Okay. Well, in hypothesis testing, power is the probability that you will reject the null when the null is false. So hypothesis testing, there's no difference between hypothesis testing and power. Hypothesis testing is a process, is a set of procedures that I outlined in my notes, and power is the probability that you'll be successful in that procedure. And as I've gone over repeatedly, that power is a function of all of those things. But in my situation for my module, when I calculated power was 1.0, which meant that it was guaranteed that I would reject the null. In hypothesis testing, what part of the t-test rejects or fails to reject the null? It's the p-value. It's the p-value, that probability that comes out, not the t, but actually the p. And it'll usually say p-value or p, and then underneath it will list some value with a decimal point and usually lots of zeros and sometimes asterisks. Okay, that was question 1. It was kind of multiple parts. Question 2, I was confused by your table on what would happen if one of the items were removed in alpha. While I understand that was intentional, is there a way that we might improve on such a table? Oh, improve upon such a table? Sure, you could probably plot it or something like that. I just took the output that's common from using the R features that I used, but it will look like very much like the same output that you will get from SPSS. So whether you're using R or SPSS, that material will look pretty much the same. And I'm sorry that one of you was confused by that table. The table is somewhat confusing, and basically what it says, that table represents the alpha. If I remove that single item, would alpha go up or down? And generally speaking, removing an item from a scale should reduce alpha, unless the item is terrible, in which case you should see no change in alpha. So again, sorry that that was confusing. Shouldn't we talk about type 1 and type 2 errors? Yes, you ought to. And I didn't. I remember that this is a perfectly imperfect module performance, okay? The aim was not to give everything through a serial representation of exactly what I would recommend. I put together a perfectly imperfect performance. And then the question goes on, also parallel measures, reliability versus validity, and error versus bias. Yes, include those. Include those where you see fit. Remember, I only took 6 minutes. There's plenty more time. You still have 15 minutes to include that. The module notes say to conduct validity analysis software, but what you're talking about is reliability. Are we supposed to do a validity or reliability analysis? And the answer is yes. Again, perfectly imperfect modules means that I omit certain things. Go back over and make sure that you're covering everything that needs to be covered. The fact that I leave things out is intentional. I want you to see what looks like when I don't do a very good job. Could you elaborate on the validity analysis that we need to do in a software package? I watched your module video twice and don't think you mentioned that. Correct, I didn't. Validity can come from correlations. You can calculate a correlation. Remember, there are different types of validities that I reviewed. And in the assigned readings in the Green Book, you will read plenty of material about different sources or different types of validity. and in my notes. And in each case, there's plenty of information about how to calculate and why to calculate certain correlations. They are correlations, okay? That is plain and simply what you're going to do. Okay, next, I'm still having trouble with discerning the difference between what the values for power and Chromebox Alpha represent. That's a pretty vague question, but could you go into depth further on them? Okay, it is a vague question, and I'm not sure I have enough time to go through all of this, but the values of power is the probability of rejecting the null. Power is to hypothesis testing, as Chromebox Alpha is to reliability. Chromebox Alpha represents an empirical test about the classical test theory assumption that all items are randomly selected from a population of all possible items. So Chromebox Alpha really doesn't have, there's no difference, there's no relationship between these two. Power is really a function of many different aspects that we talked about, and it pertains to hypothesis testing. Chromebox Alpha pertains to scale development and reliability. All right, finally, question number 7, and only 7 questions, so you spared me. Several topics discussed have multiple formulas available to use. Any chance you can steer us in the right direction as far as which ones are best to use for the hand calculations of CTT and effect size? Yes, well, I've given you effect size calculations throughout the semester so far. It's pretty straightforward. You can use that calculation all the time. Additionally, in terms of Chromebox Alpha, there's an optional reading that gives you a formula, as well as the same formula is represented in my notes. So there's plenty of formulas. You can use the formulas that I give you. You can restrict only to those formulas and you'd be fine. So you don't have to go far and wide to find different formulas. You don't have to do anything outrageous to prepare for this module. Follow essentially what I've done. Make sure that the checklist is complete when you're finished. Do not go in serial order. Please, please, please do include optional readings. It's good for you. I think it's a good idea that everybody gives it a go. Let's see, is there anything else? Well, not everybody thought that that was terribly useful, but at least I got a 7. And I do at some point want to tell you that I did a pretty crappy job with last week's quiz, and more on that later. But I will certainly give you an update next week when we meet for both for Tuesday morning, Thursday morning for section 1, and Tuesday afternoon. We also have lots of modules. Please book your module as soon as possible. Lots of times are booked up. But there's still plenty of time. We're not going to schedule many times for the second week, so you got to get them done. Many of you waited until the last minute, and we even had to schedule somebody late on Friday for the second week. Please don't do that, okay? We're just not going to be available, so I apologize for that. Now it's 10:34. And I hope I answered everybody's question. If not, please send me an email and I will answer your questions. Thank you very much. Have a good night.